Is your old traditional wallet falling apart? You know, the one filled with old hotel door keys, business cards, and store cards that you probably also have on your keys anyway? Then maybe it's time to upgrade to a more durable, slim wallet that won't feel like you're keeping a softball in your back pocket. The Ridge offers their flagship carbon fiber, aluminum, or titanium wallet in over a dozen different styles, along with other quality products like bags and phone cases. If you want to check out the Ridge's products, which come with a lifetime warranty by the way, you can go to ridge.com/gilly and use the code GILLY for 10% off your order with free worldwide shipping. Link in the description. It seems like ever since the initial release of NES games for Nintendo Switch Online users, people have been counting down the days until they announce games for other systems coming to the service. For months upon months, people have been assuming that SNES games were coming pretty soon, and well, here we are. Not only did they bring SNES games to Nintendo Switch Online, but a lot of them are actually really good quality titles, and it's all included into a really low-cost service that a lot of Switch owners already have anyway. So let's take a look at some of the best Super Nintendo games that Nintendo Switch Online has to offer. Kirby's Dream Course is one of my favorite games in the SNES library. Now, initially, growing up, I didn't have my own Super Nintendo, but my cousins did, and every time I went over their house, there were two games I would look forward to playing the most. Those games were Kirby Superstar and Kirby's Dream Course. I think this game was my first introduction to some sort of competitive game outside of something obvious like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter. When we played this game, I was out for blood. This game's basically mini-golf mixed with pool, mixed with Kirby, and it, for some reason, works. There's a ton of stages to play through, and each course has its own theme. Now, the object of the game is, well, to get the ball in the hole, but it's a bit more complicated than that. See, to even have the course and hole appear at all, you need to defeat all but one enemy in each stage by knocking into them. Once all other enemies are defeated, the last one will vanish and a hole will show up in its place. It's not that simple, though, because while playing in two-player mode, which honestly is the biggest draw for this game, you also need to obtain more stars than your opponent before sinking a shot. Each time an enemy is defeated, they leave behind a star that is then collected, but then can be stolen by your opponent if they then roll over the same star. It's less about sinking a shot first and more about collecting as many stars as possible and making it into the hole before your opponent has the chance to steal. In typical Kirby fashion, there are also power-ups you can obtain which either give you more variation in how you can shoot or make it easier to knock out enemies. Also, there's a ton of mechanics that switch up gameplay as each course goes on. This is really just an overall great game that can get super competitive when you play with a friend, but to be honest, this game is good enough to stand on its own as a one-player experience as well. So, once upon a time, there was a spin-off series from the Ghosts and Goblins franchise. It started on the Game Boy, continued with a much more fleshed-out sequel on the NES, and finally made its way to the Super Nintendo, albeit for some reason with a completely different name. I actually didn't even know Demon's Crest was an entry in the Gargoyles Quest series until almost 20 years after first getting the NES one. Much like the first two games, Demon's Crest is an action platformer with some RPG elements thrown in. You take control of Firebrand, the demon enemy from Ghosts and Goblins, in an admittedly much more mature and interesting adventure. Each stage is separated by way of a big overworld that you fly around in, which honestly, I don't like all that much. The previous games had you walking around towns akin to other RPGs of the time, but then again, this is the Super Nintendo, and every developer ever took any chance they got to shoehorn Mode 7 effects in even when they weren't necessary, so it's par for the course, I guess. Firebrand can hover, cling to walls, and shoot fire from his mouth to attack enemies, as well as a headbutt technique to attack things in the background. As the game progresses, you obtain health upgrades, you can purchase items from the shop, and along with new ability upgrades, each major boss unlocks a new transformation. I'd love to show you more than just the ground gargoyle upgrade, but I accidentally wound up getting the bad ending and couldn't get all the footage I had initially wanted. In any case, the ground gargoyle is one example, and using that transformation grants a stronger basic attack, as well as the ability to dash, but at the expense of the loss of Firebrand's wings. Anyway, the music is really great and gothic sounding, the pixel art is incredible, and the game is all around just a really solid experience. I was completely shocked when they announced Demon's Crest would be on the service, considering that it isn't all that well known, and the pool of games they released isn't all that big. I mean, it does have a following, but it's nothing when compared to, like, Mario or Zelda. This is one of the very few ways that this game can be played legitimately, and it just so happens to also be probably the most accessible way. Demon's Crest definitely wouldn't have been one of the games that I'd have thought they'd have picked, but I'm glad they did. Go play it. Despite Super Mario Bros. 3 having what I think is the best level design of any of the old Mario games, Super Mario World easily has the tightest controls and the most fleshed out mechanics. It definitely is the most fun controlling Mario game out of the first four, and its mechanics are the reason why ROM hacks like Kaizo Mario exist. The controls actually go so much deeper than the levels were designed for, and it overall just makes for a better experience because there's more freedom in how you approach each level. Mario 3 had a pretty large level select hub in each world, but it was still pretty confined and didn't have many options for different paths. Not to mention, each world was still separated completely, making it feel a bit disjointed. Super Mario World, on the other hand, had a big, expansive, well, world. The different sections of the map and all the levels were interconnected, and it really felt like you were going on an adventure throughout one entire continent. It also has secret exits for branching paths that either skip some levels or have you end up in completely new areas. There's way more meat to this game than your typical 2D Mario, even when compared to current day's New Super Mario Bros. Series. This game is also the first introduction to Yoshi that we got in a Mario game, and his abilities just further act as not only a new power-up, but an entirely new set of mechanics that change up how the game is played. While I still think that Mario 3 has the best level design, Mario World has definitely aged the best and in my opinion is easily the most accessible for new players. There's a reason it's as iconic as it is, and if all you've played of this game is the Mario World theme in Mario Maker, please do yourself a favor and check the original game out. A Link to the Past is not my favorite Zelda. It's not even one of my favorite Zeldas. But I will still sing this game's praises because not only is it beloved by millions of Zelda fans, but it set the groundwork for nearly every Zelda game that's come after it. This really is the first of what would then become the Zelda formula, for better or for worse. If you've played Ocarina of Time, A Link to the Past is basically a 2D version of that. Well, technically the other way around because Ocarina came after, but you get my point. The stories are very similar, and the progression of both games are as well. A Link to the Past is where a lot of the most memorable Zelda songs originated, including Zelda's Lullaby and the Kakariko Village theme. Kakariko, whatever. The way they fleshed out the Zelda series from the first to the third game is much like they did from Mario 1 to World. They took the groundwork set by the first game and just went nuts with it. Though comparatively linear, A Link to the Past is way more streamlined and a much more epic adventure than the first game, and really can be compared to something like current-gen Zelda when it comes to story and overall scope. The combat is also a lot more involved and takes a bit more strategy than Zelda 1's poke and run away combat. The game is so iconic that over 20 years later they made a sequel in the form of A Link Between Worlds on 3DS. This is a lot of fans' favorite Zelda game of all time, and although it's not personally one of my favorites, it's still a great game that's easily one of the first games you should play if you have the service. I feel like I shouldn't even have to say this, but if you're a fan of the Metroid series, or just Metroidvania games in general, and somehow, by some unfortunate crazy twist of fate, you've never played Super Metroid, stop what you're doing right now and boot it up on your Switch. Call out of work, cancel your plans, ditch grandma's funeral, do whatever you have to do to start playing Super Metroid right now because it's easily one of the best video games ever created. So, like a lot of other Super Nintendo games, it's a total refinement of the groundwork that was set by the NES original. And in many ways, it's almost a remake of sorts. It's not wholly a remake, but it hits many of the same beats as the first game, and even has a basically one-for-one final boss. Super Metroid is one of the only games I can go back and wholeheartedly say it's aged perfectly. I don't even think a remake of this game ever really needs to be made. That's how good they got it the first time. Not that I wouldn't want a remake, I totally would. Quick, brief rundown so I don't need to preach to you about what this game or its genre is. You got a big map, you can't explore most of it, bunch of stuff is inaccessible or blocked off, you explore, eventually obtain power-ups and items that then open up previously unexplorable parts of the map, all while growing stronger, fighting bosses, and expanding your inventory. I don't think that all really needed to be explained, but I can't just talk up Super Metroid and then assume everyone already knows how these games work, because if you do, you've probably already played it. I'm constantly back and forth between this game and Metroid Fusion, and honestly, at this point, AM2R as my favorite Metroid game, and I don't think I'll ever really decide on one. But between this game's amazing atmosphere, eerie tone, incredible music, and rewarding sense of progression, it's easy to recommend this to literally anyone who's subscribed to Nintendo Switch Online. It's insane that you just get a game of this caliber for nothing. Kirby's Dreamland 3, literally the cutest Kirby game that's ever existed. Now, if you've played any of the Kirby games, this isn't really anything out of the ordinary. What it is, though, is an extremely charming, solid, stress-free game that is a prime example of how enjoyable the Kirby series can be. It's a lot like the other Dreamland games or something like Kirby's Adventure, only this time, the main gimmick is the inclusion of the animal buddies, as well as the inclusion of Gooey, a little blue blob that can be summoned at the expense of 2 of Kirby's hit points, and helps him by acting as a CPU ally. The animal buddies act as rideable power-ups, essentially, like Yoshi to Mario, and change up the mechanics slightly. For example, Kine the fish swims faster underwater, Choo Choo the octopus can cling to ceilings, and Rick the hamster. As a Kirby game, it's pretty par for the course as far as the mainline platformers in the series go. This is an overall enjoyable game, and if you're feeling stressed out at all, this is definitely the game to pick up and play. I personally would have included Kirby Superstar as the Kirby representation for Nintendo Switch Online, but Kirby's Dreamland 3 is still a great game and a great example of a Kirby game, and easily one of the most unique looking ones in the series, and I'd say it's worth playing just for the art style alone. A game I admittedly am ashamed that despite having picked up multiple times over the course of 20 years, I've never actually beaten. I've included it on this list not only because it's a game you must play, but because it's a game I myself must play. Yoshi's Island started its life as Super Mario World 2, which was probably the worst idea ever. It's so far from being a sequel to Mario World or even a Mario game at all that it went on to spawn an entire series of its own. Yoshi's Island was the start of a series of games that still is being produced today, and in many people's opinion is the best in the series. Now this usually applies to a lot of franchises, people thinking that an old game was the best one, but I think in this case, a lot of it is warranted. Yoshi's Island has not aged a single day. The art style is completely timeless because it's not even what I'd feel comfortable calling pixel art. It straight up just looks like a bunch of crayon drawings. And if you ever hear anyone say anything bad about Yoshi's Island, pretty much 100% of the time, the only thing they have to say is that it's annoying when you get hit and Mario floats away and starts crying, which to be honest, is totally fine in my opinion, considering it's supposed to be a punishment for getting hurt. Don't want to hear Baby Mario's big stupid mouth? Maybe play a little better. Many people consider this game to be an absolute masterpiece, and despite not having actually finished it myself, I've played enough of it to be able to say those claims are completely warranted. Its level design holds up, its art style holds up, the music holds up, and it's honestly one of the best games the Super Nintendo has to offer. Nintendo really hit it out of the park with these SNES releases, and while not every single game they put out day one is amazing, roughly half of them are must-play games that define the Super Nintendo. I honestly can't wait to see what they end up giving us in the future, because even as an NES fan, I have to say the games they gave us were often lackluster, and I wasn't at all expecting even half of what they ended up actually offering for Super Nintendo games, especially not right at launch. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it and want to see more, well, there's a couple other videos you can check out right there. And if you want to keep up with everything I release, subscribe and then tap the bell icon because YouTube. I also have a Patreon right there if you want to help support the channel.